Hi, everybody. It's Mike from Here, the Watchman, and this is the Watchman Report for September 15th, 2020. We are all still here. God bless that, man. Let me tell you. Listen, we have a great show lined up for you today. Before we get started with our guest who's coming to us all the way from Israel, we have just a couple of housekeeping issues to do. Don't forget, go to hearthewatchmen.com. Get signed up for our virtual conference, which we will be releasing in just 10 days, September 25th. Great lineup. The title is Igniting the Fire, the Ultimate Solution. You've got some great speakers, Pastor Paul Begley, Derek Gilbert, Josh Peck, Drew Graffia, David Paxton. It goes on and on and on. Marzulli, L.A. Marzulli will be a part of it. Pastor Billy Crone, Chris Taylor. The list goes on and on. $39, you get 6 months of on-demand viewing, plus you get free access for that 6 months to our Dallas March of 2020 conference, which was held right there in Grapevine, Texas. That's the Remnant Warrior Conference, which was the last in-person conference that was held in the States here since March. And the next in-person conference, the first in-person conference, will be here at the Watchman, Orange County, California, November 5th through the 8th. And you can find information on that at hearthewatchmen.com. So without further ado, let's welcome Josh Reinstein on the show today from Israel. Josh, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Well, Josh, you know, you have written an amazing book. And folks, the name of the book is Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel. It's an amazing story about Trump and Israel, and it's just got a great perspective. Josh had an initiative of faith-based diplomacy in Israel and was led to look at this book from several different directions when he wrote it. I truly believe it was inspired by the Lord. Josh, there's been so many books and articles about Israel's approach to the issues from political or religious perspectives. What led you to write this book?
Well, thanks for the question. You know, this is the culmination of my work since 2004 when I founded the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus. This is a caucus within the Parliament of Israel of members of our parliament that work with Christian leaders around the world. And we quickly realized that it was Christians, not countries, that are standing with Israel. It's people who take their biblical support and turn it into real political action that we can count on. And we call that faith-based diplomacy. And through the years, we've developed faith-based diplomacy. I'm the president also of the Israel Allies Foundation. We have 44 Israel Allies caucuses in parliaments around the world. In Washington, D.C., we have the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus. And we have a network of about 1,000 members of parliament that are working to develop support for Israel based on faith-based diplomacy. And so throughout this time, there's been a lot of questions from Bible-believing Christians, from Jewish people, just from regular people who are saying, you know, what is this new alliance about? Why are we seeing so much success between the U.S. and Israel relationship? So I figured it's time to write a book that explains not only what is faith-based diplomacy, not only what's happening today, but what's going to happen in the future. How does this tie into the fulfillment of biblical prophecy? And so when I wrote the book, I was very excited about not just talking about what's happening legally and biblically and, you know, archaeologically and politically, but mostly talking from a biblical lens, because you can't understand what's happening in the land of Israel if you don't understand the Bible.
Well, Josh, do you have a copy of the book you could hold up for us?
Yeah, it's right here. This is Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel, the power of faith-based diplomacy. And as you can see on the cover, you see the symbol of the new embassy in Jerusalem, the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem, on the Arch of Titus in front of the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. And this is really the symbolism of what we're seeing today. And if you look at the title, it starts with Titus. And some people don't even know who Titus is, but Titus was the general, the Roman general, that destroyed the Second Temple. And when he did that, he said that, you know, he declared victory over the God of Israel. He said, that's it, paganism won, the Jewish people are over, there's no monotheism anymore, the God of Israel lost. And he was so excited about that, that he actually built the the largest infrastructure project of the time, the Arch of Titus. It's actually, you can go visit it in Rome today. It was the first arch to commemorate a victory of war. Now there's a lot. There's the Arch of Triomphe in France and many around the world. It was the first one to commemorate that he beat the God of Israel. Now, of course, the reason he thought he won is because he didn't know the Bible. Anyone who knew the Bible knew that this was just the beginning of prophecy, that the Jewish people were going to be kicked out of the land of Israel and then brought back to the land of Israel from the four corners of the world. And the same is true of today. If you don't look at Israel through a biblical point of view, you miss the story. You don't understand what's going on. And that's why it was important to write it and explain what that means.
Well, can you give us a good example that people here in the States can understand about what faith-based diplomacy really is?
Well, faith-based diplomacy is when Christians, people of faith, get involved with political discourse. So the best example, the most successful example that we have today is the embassy moving from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This is something we've been working on since 1995, when a bipartisan effort in the House of Representatives passed the Embassy Act, basically saying it's time to move our embassy to the capital of Israel, Jerusalem. Now, every 6 months, every president, Democrat and Republican, pushed that off because they said, no, this is going to lead to death and destruction. This is going to be, blood in the streets if we recognize Jerusalem. But Christians in recent years has made this a very important political issue. In fact, it's in the Republican platform in Israel. It was voiced to the Trump administration that this is one of their prime objectives. And when Trump did it and moved the embassy to Jerusalem, there wasn't just, blood in the streets like they said. There was actually peace. There's more peace. We see today that they're signing peace agreements in the White House. And so when you do something that's biblically correct, it works in Israel. When you do something politically correct, it doesn't work. And that's what we try to explain through faith-based diplomacy.
That's interesting. And there has been so much going on over there. There's so many developments that we've been following on this side of the world. Now, why is it so important that Christians support Israel?
Well, look, if you believe in the Bible, and I think our tourism ministry has the greatest slogan. They say, if you like the book, you love the country. So if you like the Bible, then Israel's the most exciting thing going around. In the last 72 years, we've seen the vast majority of biblical prophecy been fulfilled right before our very eyes. We saw the ingathering of the exiles from the north and the south and the east and the west coming back on the wings of eagles, or airplanes as we call them today. We got to see the deserts bloom. We see that the nations coming up to Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. All these things were talked about 2,000 years ago, and we're getting to see them before our very eyes. God is showing that the Bible is not just a real historic book or even real lately, it's also a real predictor of the future. And if you're excited about the Bible and the God of Israel, then Israel is where your focus should be. And of course, God asks his people to pray for the peace of Jerusalem because he wants his people to be focused on Jerusalem. And so as Christians, it's essential to stand with the state of Israel and to keep your focus on Jerusalem because that's where all the action is right now.
Well, it's really interesting, all the different actions and everything that's going on over there. Talk to us a little bit about the Christian Allies Caucus.
Yeah, it's very interesting. As I mentioned, 2004, we established the caucus. It was made of members of our parliament from left to right, religious, secular. And we realized that if you have an economic agenda, you're not necessarily going to stand with Israel. We don't have the oil wealth of our neighbors. And if you have a political agenda, also not a good idea to stand with Israel. We have 1 vote in the UN, 22 Arab votes, many more Muslim votes against us. It's only people who put values and beliefs ahead of economic and political concerns that will stand with Israel. And that leaves the people of the book, both Jews and Christians.
Well, Josh, now this is pretty interesting, okay? Of all the things that all the people in history that you could have chosen to mention in this book, why Titus as an example?
So Titus is the ultimate explanation of what's going on here. As I mentioned, Titus thought he beat the God of Israel, when really what he did was he set a pattern of prophecy that was going to unfold before everyone's eyes, leading to the recreation of Israel. And the same thing is happening today. You have all these politicians and diplomats all over the world saying, we need to divide the land of Israel and that will bring peace. And then they're surprised that dividing the land of Israel brings war. And so they're missing the story because they're not looking at it through a biblical lens. And if you don't understand the Bible, then you can't understand what's happening in the newspaper. And that's why Bible-believing Christians are so well in such an advantaged position that they have a really, bird's eye view of what's really happening in Israel. And that's why they've been so successful when making claims and asking for help when it comes to the U.S. Israel relationship, but also internationally with our 44 Israelites caucuses around the world.
Wow. And now, for all of us over here, what does President Trump's policy really have to do with the book?
Well, President Trump is the first president to come out and say, look, I understand that my base, Christians, stand with Israel, and we're going to do everything we can to strengthen Israel. And that is going to bring peace. All right. So what he does is he strengthens Israel. He strengthens the only free democracy in the Middle East. The past administration, the Obama administration, said, no, Israel and the Palestinian conflict is really what's causing destabilization in the Middle East. We need to strengthen Iran. And by strengthening Iran, we can bring about peace. And so that was a complete failure, whereas Donald Trump's position has led to incredible successes. So he's done some of the biggest things in the U.S.-Israel relationship we could ever have asked for. And everyone warned him that they were going to be a disaster, that you can't, recognize sovereignty in the Golan Heights. You can't stop the Iran deal. You can't pass Taylor Force Act that stops giving American tax dollars to terrorists in the PA, because that will just destabilize the region. That will cause war. But of course, we see it actually caused peace. Not only do we have these peace agreements now with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, but we also have countries like Serbia and Guatemala and Kosovo and Malawi now moving their embassies to Jerusalem and bringing peace to the region. So everyone who was talking from a real politic point of view got it wrong. But the Trump administration, who understands what Christians want them to do and understands what's important in the Middle East, they got it right. And that's really the power of faith-based diplomacy.
That's amazing. I mean, I've never heard it broken down like that. As we progress through 2020, which we can all agree has just been like an incredibly insane year, we see anti-Semitism on the rise. What do you attribute that to?
Well, I think that what people are missing is not only is anti-Semitism on the rise, but Christianity is on the rise. I mean, we're seeing these riots in the streets of America today, and everyone's like, oh yeah, it's for social justice. But then wait a minute, why are they burning Bibles? Why are they breaking windows in synagogues and lighting churches on fire? The real truth is that the anarchists who are doing these riots are there because they want to destroy the foundation of the United States of America. And America is founded on Judeo-Christian foundations. Israel is the only other country in the world that is founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And that's why we're such good friends. People never ask themselves, why is America always saying Israel our greatest ally, this tiny little country in the Middle East? Why isn't England their greatest ally, or Japan or Australia? Why is Israel the greatest ally? It's because we're the only two countries founded on Judeo-Christian principles. And what the people who hate Israel really want to do is they want to destroy these Judeo-Christian values and these Judeo-Christian principles. And that's what we're seeing today. It's a clash of civilization.
I get asked this question all the time with Here the Watchmen as we do our conferences around the country and our shows and our Zoom meetings, our fellowship meetings. Christians want to do what they can to support Israel, but many of them just don't know what to do. What would you say Christians can do to support Israel?
Well, I think the first thing is they need to educate themselves with what's going on in Israel. That's why I wrote the book. I think one of the things they can do is they can buy Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel and read it and understand it, to understand really how they can get involved. The most important thing is that Christians can't just sit around and pray about it. They need to take an action. They need to do something. Now, prayer is very important. And the first thing I always recommend is pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We believe in the power of prayer. We think it's important. But you also have to take an action. Come to Israel. Come see it for yourself. Maybe you can't do that in Corona times. But get involved with the story of Israel. There's a lot of people saying lies about Israel. Educate yourself. Call them out. Write into your media. Talk to your congressman. I mean, there are things that individuals can do in their own life. It could be just as simple as telling your children about Israel and about Jerusalem and explaining what modern Israel has to do with the fulfillment of prophecy. Just teaching your friends and family, talking to your pastor. There's a lot of things you can do But I try to lay out, a roadmap in the book, Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel, that really will lead them to take what they can do personally and turn that into real action. Because when Christians get involved and they take their biblical support and turn it into political action, that's when you get the incredible power of faith-based diplomacy.
Well, Josh, do you believe that Christians have a role in play here, or playing for the fulfillment of biblical prophecy?
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing is that Jews and Christians have been walking up a mountain from different sides, and we just got to the top and we're starting to see each other. But what we understand from our prophecies and in the Bible is that 10 Gentiles will grab the fringe of each Jew and lift them up, that the nations will carry our sons in their arms and our daughters on the back to Israel, that the nations will come to Jerusalem for the feast. In the book of Ezekiel, it says that when we come back to Israel, we'll be like dreamers. And then the nations will say, look what God has done for you. Then we will say, wow, look what God has done for us. It's the nations that see the fulfillment of prophecy and these prophetic things before the Jewish people. So as Jewish people, we believe that Christians have an incredibly important role in the fulfillment of prophecy, and that as we see Christians get involved with the fulfillment of prophecy and standing up with Israel, and big things are happening. I can tell you that in the last 3.5 years, and I'm the president of the Israel Allies Foundation, we made a list of the top 10 things that America could do for Israel to make this relationship even greater. And our goal was to get one of them done. The Trump administration has done in the last 3.5 years, 9 of them. 9 out of 10 of the biggest asks we could ever ask for. And they've done it so fast that people kind of missed the story.
Well, the things do develop over there lately, it's almost every day you read something, but you have to understand, here in the States, they're trying to distract us all with this pandemic thing that we're under. And so that's the big focus. But I see it, and I see it in some of the other writings that are posted on the alternative news. It's amazing. In Israel, what is the sentiment in Israel about all of this?
Well, I think that people understand that we're in a time that, people see dark for light and light for darkness. They see good for evil and evil for good. They see bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Our role is to be a light unto the nations. We try to lead by example. We try to do what's right. We're the only free democracy in the Middle East. And we believe that, this story, our past, our present, and our future has been foretold. We take great comfort in the fact that there will be peace in Jerusalem, as I'm sure do you, Mike. The question is, are we going to go the hard way or the easy way? And that really depends on us. We have freedom of choice. And so the more people of faith get involved, the easier the way is going to be.
Well, it's amazing, Josh. My wife, she has been over there like 2 or 3 times. She was there with Pastor Begley and Zev Parat, and she was over there with someone else, Derek Gilbert, I think. Anyway, she would send me messages at home and send me pictures of people lining the streets in support of President Trump there. It's amazing, and it's just heartwarming to see, the Israeli population standing behind a president that has truly, as I hear it from you, affected change in Jerusalem.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable. The Jewish people don't really agree on much. They always say if you have 2 Israelis, you have 3 opinions. But when it comes to Donald Trump, I think there's across the board support. Look, we had to live through the Obama administration that was very critical to Israel. They were supporting Iran's nuclear ambitions through that horrible deal. And to see someone like Donald Trump become president and to really just make the promises, but to follow through on the actions. How could you not like him in Israel? He's done incredible things. He's bringing peace to our region. Foreign policy-wise, America's back on the scene, and that's what we want.
Well, listen, folks, the book, Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel. Pick it up, get it. Take a look at it and understand what's truly going on over there. Josh, how do people get the book, and how do they find you?
Well, you can go onto Amazon and write Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel. It comes up as a hard copy, as a Kindle. as a soft copy, so you can get it in a variety of different ways. You can go to triumphofisrael.com, and there is a landing page about the book. You can follow me on Twitter at Reinstein Josh, or you can go to israelallies.org. That's our foundation. Or on Facebook, you can go to the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus Facebook page. We have posts every week. So you can also go to YouTube and watch my TV show, Israel Now News. We have a weekly news show that comes out every week. So there's a variety of ways of following what we're doing. But thank you, Mike. I thank you for your endorsement. I encourage all of you to go out and buy Titus Trump and the Triumph of Israel. I think it's a very important book for this time. It's very timely.
Well, Josh, again, I know it's like some crazy hour there, and I appreciate you joining us today. And folks, do support Josh and what he's doing. We just lost his feed. He's back.
Oh, are you back there?
See what they're doing, right? They are trying to interrupt us, but support Josh and what's going on in President Trump and what's here as we move.
Yeah, they didn't like the.
No, they don't like us right now, Josh. So listen, folks, that's going to wrap it up. We're going to try and talk Josh into making it. There he is. He's back. He's back. So
I'm back. I'm back.
There you go. So we're going to try and talk Josh into making it out to one of the Hear the Watchmen conferences in 2021 to share with you. We'll just have to see how things develop. I know we're going to Orange County in November, and I know we're going back to Dallas in March. How? I'm not sure, but we're going to leave that up to God. Again, Josh, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Mike.
Well, listen, folks, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Watchman's Report on September 15th, 2020. And remember, as we always say here, absolutely nothing you can't do with Jesus in your heart, except nothing at all. Get out there and activate your faith and get busy. And we'll see you next time here on the Watchman's Report.